The topic of best superhero movie ever made is something that comic book fans very often debate. And while I can agree that a movie like Avengers Infinity War, Endgame, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, or The Dark Knight are all great movies and definitely deserve to be in the conversation for the best superhero movie of all time, there's one movie in particular that not only is incredibly underrated, but is so often left out of this conversation and almost never even gets a mention when it comes to this conversation of best superhero movie ever. And to me, that is just honestly such a travesty because this movie might possibly be the greatest superhero movie that we've ever gotten. And that's why today we're talking Batman. Mask of the Phantasm is the best superhero movie of all time. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. All right, getting into Batman Mask of the Phantasm. This is, of course, an adaptation from the DCAU, and as many of you will probably know, the DCAU is a universe that I praise very often on this channel. I think the universe revolutionized the DC universe, so it stands to reason that their first movie entry would be rather good. So basically, to break down this film, we get a murder mystery. However, we also get a lot of backstory during this movie, so it is essentially split up into two parts. One part being in present day, where we follow the mysterious figure of the Phantasm brutally murdering multiple mob bosses, and then we also get flashbacks to the times before Bruce Wayne became Batman, and he also has a love interest. However, I will say, unlike most Batman portrayals, this is a love interest that I not only am incredibly invested in, I genuinely care about this character, and I would have loved to seen Batman actually get a happy ending. However, as we find out later on in the movie, that is just not going to be the case. But as this movie progresses and takes us through the story, present day, of Batman trying to follow this mystery, we also see Batman before he totally shut off his heart. We get little hints as to why he shut off his heart. And we even get multiple scenes in present day of multiple women saying that Bruce is afraid of engagement. He has intimacy issues. And this all leads to the flashbacks being that much more compelling because we actually see him incredibly happy in those flashbacks. So we become incredibly invested in what ends up happening to that happiness. However, before we can find that out, we get potentially one of the best scenes that I have ever seen in a Batman movie. And that is the scene where Bruce Wayne goes to his parents' grave and talks to them in the pouring down rain, pleading with them not to have to be Batman anymore. You see, at this time, Bruce is starting out with his Batman Begins era. However, while he's doing this, he's also continuing his romance with Andrea Beaumont. And as this is going on, we actually are shown and are told that Bruce, being this vigilante persona, is going to be very difficult or even virtually impossible if he has someone at home waiting for him. It's not something he counted on. And this is a struggle that we see him go through throughout practically the entire film, even in present day. He has conversations with Alfred about this, and it drives him to the point where he has to go to his parents' grave and plead with them to give up on his promise, to donate more money to the police so that they can help, and he can help in that way. And it's at this point we see Bruce totally break down, fall to his knees, and say he didn't count on this happening. He didn't count on being happy. He just needs a sign that it is okay, that it's okay for him to be happy and move beyond this promise he made. And it's at this moment we see Andrea Beaumont find him at the grave. She knew him well enough to know that in this time of uncertainty, this is probably where he would go, showcasing how good of a romantic partner she truly is. And in this moment, we get a really sweet, touching moment between the two of them. Her reassuring him that maybe they were the ones who ended up sending her. Maybe her being there is a sign in of itself that it's okay for Bruce not to keep that promise. And this goes so far that he actually ends up proposing to Andrea, and she actually says yes. And you think that they might actually get this happily ever after, only to see a little bit later on that she had to turn down the engagement. And you see the heartbreak on his face. However, what you also see is probably one of the other best scenes from a Batman story we've ever gotten, and that is shortly after the engagement is broken off. We see Bruce has continued trying to keep that promise, and part of trying to keep that promise is needing to create a persona to instill fear into criminals, because although he has shown that he is pretty capable when it comes to hand-to-hand combat or stopping crimes, the people aren't afraid of him. So he needed to become something else, a symbol of fear, to make sure criminals were frightened just from the very sight of him. And it's at this moment we see him put his mask on, and as this is happening, we we actually see Alfred's reaction to this, and it is genuine fear. And this moment is so good for so many reasons, but I think the part that I like most is that throughout this movie, Alfred is shown multiple times to clearly not want Bruce to go down this route of being Batman. And while on the surface, it might just look like, yeah, obviously Alfred wants Bruce to be happy and he sees the path of Batman as something that will ultimately not allow Bruce to have happiness, but we find out later his actual reasoning and his actual true fears about the whole situation. And that actually goes into another one of the absolutely perfect scenes in this movie. But I'll get to that in a little bit, because aside from all this very intriguing stuff in the past, we cannot forget in present day, we still have the Phantasm going around just straight up murdering people. However, the Phantasm is not the only villain in this movie. This movie actually does something pretty ambitious. They not only try to have multiple villains in one film, which a lot of films obviously try, and although sometimes it does work really well, there are other times where it just does not fit and the story feels very crammed. Spider-Man 3 and Amazing Spider-Man 2 are perfect examples of this. However, in this film, the villains are balanced so perfectly to the point where somehow adding the Joker, who is quite literally the most iconic villain, not just in DC, but overall in comics, doesn't overshadow the newly created Phantasm. In fact, having him in the story just enhances everything else. You see, the Joker finds out about all of these killings, and at first, I actually really like his reaction when one of the mob bosses goes to Joker and asks him for help to take down Batman, and the Joker is really happy about this. The Joker is so incredibly pleased that he might have driven Batman to the point where he's literally offing different mob bosses, and that is just such a Joker thing to do. And speaking of Joker things to do, there are multiple instances in this movie that showcase why Mark Hamill's Joker is the most perfect iteration of the Joker that we've ever got. You see, this is a version of the Joker who not only is smart enough to follow along this mystery to the point where he finds out who the Phantasm is even before Batman does, and even manages to set a trap for the Phantasm that almost ends up killing them. And we are also shown the brutality of the Joker. He uses his Joker toxin multiple times in this movie with no regard for who he uses it on. He also uses one of those people as bait for the Phantasm. And although he isn't able to kill the Phantasm in that moment, he does just straight up blow up that one mob boss that he had already infected with the Joker toxin. And I really like it when the Joker is a character that on one hand is a psychopathic murderer, but on the other hand is also really goofy and wacky, and we can see him doing some really wacky things. And like I already mentioned, this version of the Joker is someone who will use a mob boss as bait and then just blow him up to take out his target. But then later on, he also picks up a mixer and tries to use it as a weapon, but then also during that fight picks up a big thing of bologna and beats the shit out of the Phantasm with a giant thing of bologna. And also through that goofiness, we are shown how capable the Joker is. Even the big bad villain of this movie can't necessarily take out the Joker. He even gets the Phantasm to the point where they're about to be sucked up into a giant fan and be killed, which once again not only showcases how capable and menacing the Joker is, but also how wacky he is. That is an absurd plan to use a gigantic fan to shred someone up and kill them, but it is incredibly effective because if it wasn't for Batman swooping in the moment that he did, the Phantasm would have been killed in that moment. And while yes, having the Joker in this film could potentially take away from the Phantasm, but I honestly don't think that's the case at all. The Phantasm is still the focal point of this movie. And although Batman towards the end of the film ends up fighting the Joker, and that is our climactic final battle, I think it's actually a lot more fitting that the final battle is between Batman and Joker because of who the Phantasm is revealed to be. It is actually revealed towards the end of the movie that the Phantasm is actually Andrea. She returned because her father ended up being murdered. She lost everything. And in the moment that Batman actually finds that out, he pleads with her. He pleads with her to leave that place and not even pursue the Joker. She's already killed multiple people, but by this point, all Batman is worried about is her getting out of there. You see, unlike the times where he goes to Catwoman, and although he shows genuine care for her, he always ends up arresting her. He always ends up putting his duty before his care and love for her. But in this situation, it's the opposite. His care and love for Andrea is the most important thing to him, to the point where once she actually resurfaces, and before Batman figures out that she is indeed this murdering Phantasm, Batman once again is considering giving up being Batman. And it's even crazier than when he was going to do that in the first place, because this is a version of Batman who has been active for about 10 years, and he's willing to just give all that up because because of his strong feelings for her. And because we've seen that romance laid out throughout this entire movie, we understand why he wants her to just leave in this moment later on, and he doesn't want to actually arrest her. And although at first she does end up leaving, after Batman and Joker finish their battle and Batman is able to defeat the Joker, Andrea once again appears in front of the Joker, and the Joker tells her that he already surrendered and tells Batman to let her know that, and Batman at this point pretty much disregards that the Joker is even there, calling out to Andrea, making it very clear that he knows Andrea even though the Joker is quite literally right there. But that just showcases how narrow his sight becomes when it comes to Andrea. All he cares about is saving her, ensuring that she doesn't cross the line even further than she has. And Batman can't physically stop her in this moment, not only because he and the Joker had a pretty crazy battle that left him bruised and battered, but also I don't think he would try to fight Andrea. You see, after he finds out that the Phantasm is Andrea, all he tries to do is plead with her and talk to her. There's not a single time that he actually tries to fight her. And I think that might be one of the other things that I actually really liked about this villain. Batman only fights the Phantasm for about 23 seconds in this entire movie. Yeah, you heard me right. There aren't many punches and kicks actually thrown between Batman and the Phantasm. They have one very quick rooftop fight scene that ends so abruptly, and it feels a little weird in the moment. However, once it's revealed that it is indeed Andrea under the mask, it actually makes a lot of sense, because by this point, Andrea knows that Bruce is Batman, so it stands to reason that she wouldn't want to actually fight him. And then moving on later in the film, once Batman knows that the Phantasm is Andrea, it also makes sense why he doesn't want to fight her. And it also showcases that all of Batman's training, everything he's done up to this point, wasn't enough to prepare him in this moment. And it wasn't enough to save the person that he probably needed to save most, the person that meant more to him than anyone else, the person that meant enough to him to make him actually consider giving up being Batman, not only before he became Batman, but after he was already Batman for about a decade, which is absolutely insane. That's not something we often get to see in a story. However, unfortunately, Batman does not get his happy ending, and as Batman is trying to plead with Andrea in the end, multiple bombs start to go off that the Joker had set up as a self-destruct. And although he initially wanted to escape, as he looks around and realizes the chaos and sees everything exploding around them and realizes that the three of them might all die together, we get an incredibly maniacal laugh from the Joker, once again showcasing why he was a brilliant addition to this film. However, he once again cannot overshadow the main villain and the main premise of this movie, and that's because we also get one last exchange between Andrea and Batman where she tells him she's sorry. However, it's something she needed to do and they just couldn't be happy. And then you see everything explode. You see Batman get thrown into a sewer system, and as Batman rises up out of the water, you see in the distance the area they were just in just fully enveloped in flames and explosions. And it's at this moment we get not only my favorite scene from a Batman film, but probably my favorite comic book scene we've ever gotten in a movie, and that is when Bruce is feeling extremely down after everything that happened. He's sitting in the Batcave with his cowl down, costume still on, and he simply says to Alfred that he couldn't save her, and we get one of the most heartfelt exchanges between Alfred and Bruce in this moment, where Alfred tries to reassure Bruce and say that no one could have saved Andrea. She picked this dark path long ago. She looked into this abyss a long time ago, and unfortunately it ended up swallowing her up. No one, not even you, could have saved her. And then this is where we actually get a peek into Alfred's mindset as well, and we learn how afraid Alfred has always been about Bruce being Batman. That Bruce goes out there and fights incredible evil all the time, and that over time, this blackens the soul. Something that Andrea had happened to her long ago, and it's a fear that Alfred has always had would end up happening to Bruce. All of the time being Batman, he thought would dehumanize him and bring him to this place where he is nothing but this abyss. However, Alfred then acknowledges that although it's been a lot of time, and although Batman's seen some pretty dark things, he's managed to not fall into that abyss. And Alfred states how happy he is for that fact. And not only is this an incredibly sentimental moment, but in my opinion, the relationship between Alfred and Bruce is the most important dynamic that Batman needs to have a successful movie. And the fact that they give Alfred and Bruce probably the best exchanges of dialogue in this entire film just showcases how much of a masterpiece this movie truly is. And it really hits home on the emotions. We feel the emotional weight of what Alfred is saying. We feel the emotional weight of Bruce's failures in this moment, but also overall in this movie, because it was all laid out in such a beautiful way. And that's why, to me, this film is just so absolutely perfect. I honestly don't think I would change a single thing other than potentially the runtime, because this movie is actually under an hour and a half long. However, even that being said, it does not feel like that at all. And by that, I don't mean that this movie overstays its welcome. I mean that every scene is so calculated that nothing feels rushed. We get to the conclusion and we get to every single plot point in such an organic way, and it flows so perfectly that it actually justifies this runtime. And I feel like if you would have added even more, could the movie have been a little bit better? Possibly, but it also could have been a lot worse, because I feel like every single scene in this movie truly had a purpose. It wasn't just to fill runtime. It was to help progress the story forward. And there wasn't a wasted moment in this entire film. And it's for all those reasons that I truly consider this movie to be the best superhero movie we've ever gotten. Or at the very least, it belongs in the conversation. But I'm interested to hear from all of you. Do you agree that this movie is one of the best superhero films we've ever gotten? And if you don't think this movie is the absolute best, what other superhero movies belong in the conversation of best superhero movie ever? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.